On this episode of the Hustle of the Day podcast, I have Kristin Marquet. Kristin had a career in PR which led her to 3 books about the topic and now has a boutique consultancy agency. You're going to want to listen to this one. Let's jump into it. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Hustle of the Day podcast. My name is Trent. I'm going to be your host on this journey, but you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to my guest, Kristin Marquet. Kristin, I'm so excited to have you on. Like we talked about before, you've got an impressive list of accomplishments, but I'm not going to do them justice. So I'm going to have you jump in, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your background.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun for me, and I'm so excited to talk to you and share my story with your listeners. A little about me. I've been in the PR game pretty much my entire professional career. I started my business back in 2009. That was my first business. And I sold out in 2018. And now I do consulting for very high-level entrepreneurs that are really looking to build their name recognition and their thought leadership online and offline, as well as speakers. And if somebody wants to write a book, I will actually help them build that side of the brand as well.
Okay, that's very good to know, because that is something that I need to talk to you about, because I am working on a book myself right now. So that's
awesome.
that's something that didn't come up before. We'll need to talk about that later, but that's very cool. So I like that you mentioned that you balance the online and offline. Obviously, you being involved in PR for most of your career, you've obviously dealt with both. How do you balance that now? Because a lot of people think, online's the way it's got to be, but obviously there is still a place for that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. First of all, I think getting featured in the print New York Times or print Forbes, print Fortune is going to carry so much more weight than getting featured online, just from a credibility standpoint. And that's one thing a lot of my older clients say. They're more interested in getting coverage in the print world. And it really does ring true in terms of getting leads and building your online footprint and doing all that type of thing. That the digital sphere is good, but it's very competitive. And, we can certainly talk about that a little bit more, but it's just, I can't tell you how many times over the years I've had clients come to me and say, hey, Chris, I want to be a contributor to Forbes, or I want to get featured in Inc.com, so on and so forth. And it's like, well, what do you have to offer that I can actually pitch to an editor or to, an editorial director? And that's really what it comes down to, is being unique and being able to create something that makes you pretty much stand out. And that's actually true for online as well as off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. There is a lot of weight that is carried with being in a print publication, whereas online, somebody just has to click a button and you've got something out there. Obviously, like you mentioned, Forbes or Inc.com, they're not going to do that for anybody, but it still requires a lot more of a process to be able to get in the print publications. So
for sure. And the same thing for television.
Yeah,
absolutely. Television is not a dying breed. A lot of the younger generations, they're like, well, I don't want to be on TV. I don't want to be on radio. My audience doesn't listen to the radio, or they don't watch TV. And it's like, yes, they do, and it really is so important to diversify your publicity efforts when you're an entrepreneur, not just in the digital space or just on podcasts. You want to get in print magazines, print newspapers, whether they're monthly, they're, bi-monthly, they're weekly, they're daily, whatever it is, as well as radio and television. And local television could be super helpful as well.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a good point of the stereotype that, that the younger generation isn't going to be watching TV or, things like that. There was a local realtor who was talking about Monopoly came out with the millennial version of Monopoly, and they got rid of real estate and because you couldn't afford it anyway and all this. And he had a whole commentary about how millennials are actually his largest growing segment of home buyers. And so it really is something that you do need to think about, the diversification, like you mentioned. It's not just everybody's in one place. There's so many niches online now and offline that you really do need to have your fingerprint kind of everywhere to be able to accomplish specific goals.
Agree, 100%. I mean, you kind of have to be everywhere, but at the same time, you got to be very strategic in the way that you allocate your time and your resources. We can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because I've had clients too that have come to me and had said, "Hey, Chris, you know what? I can't be everywhere at the same time, whether it's social media, whether it's, digital publicity, print, whatever it is." And the way to get around that is figure out what your objectives are, make sure that you can actually achieve them. And once you do achieve them, then you can move into other areas. And that's why, particularly on the social media side, I know we're not really talking about that too much, but if a client comes to me and says, "Hey, you know what, Chris, I can't be on Pinterest, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and TikTok, and Snapchat, and all these other places, what do?" I say, start with one, master it, make sure your audience is there. And then once you have learned the nuances of the way that platform works, move on to something else. I mean, it's common sense. Yeah. So, and entrepreneurs have a tendency to get so overwhelmed so quickly with what they should do, when they should do it, and how to be strategic.
Yeah. And it's kind of the shiny object syndrome too. It's like, I'm working on LinkedIn and, they're talking about TikTok. Let's jump over there and see what that's about. And it's like, there's great reach still over on Twitter. Let's go over to that. And, it's definitely, I'm guilty of it myself because it's the shiny object syndrome for sure.
Yeah, I think that's just human nature, though. I think that that's the way that humans are programmed. There's that element surprise, or there's some level of excitement. But yeah, you have to be focused and you have to be disciplined if you want to be an entrepreneur and you actually want to succeed at this digital game.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got obviously a lot of experience in this field. So I want to pick your brain a little bit about that, about the PR side. We talked a little bit before we started recording about you cultivating relationships with the right people. How can you do that when people are both so available online, but then also it's hard to cut through that noise of, they get inundated with requests of people wanting to talk to them? How do you cultivate those relationships with people?
Well, I'm really glad that you asked that. It's a simple formula. I think that a lot of editors and journalists, myself included, writing for Forbes and for Inc., people will pitch you a story that is self-serving or that really isn't interesting. Mm-hmm. Read the editor's column, figure out what they write about, figure out their voice and their tone, and then sit down and talk to your team or talk to your friends, talk to your family, and try to get an objective view of your business or your product or your service, and come up with something that's newsworthy. And, I have a million different ways to figure out what's newsworthy and what isn't. And,
Mm-hmm.
I can share that in the show notes if you're interested, because there are literally like 100 of them.
Yeah.
And then once you figure out how that editor writes, the type of stories that they're looking for, their beat. You learn a little bit about who they are, and you craft a pitch that's interesting, you're going to win, right. 10 times out of 10. You can't give an editor something that's self-serving or that's just full of fluff, unless, of course, you are a fashion designer, and you're trying to get, media coverage for a new collection or, a new handbag or something. But I'm telling you, every entrepreneur, if you are profitable, has something unique to offer to the media. You just really need to look to see what makes you unique if you don't have your value proposition. If you do, then you can craft your narrative around whatever your value proposition is, and I tell clients this right from the start.
Yeah. And I think it's really comes down to what you were saying, doing the research and, figuring out the person that you're talking to and figuring out what makes them tick, and not just blanket send something out the exact same pitch to everybody and seeing which one sticks. It's really doing the work and really crafting it for that specific individual.
For sure. And I can't tell you how many times that I've seen other PR people that work for larger firms blanket one pitch to 5,000 different media outlets through Cision or through some other, PR software program. And me being on the PR side and also being on the journalism side, it pisses me off to no end. It's a bad practice. It makes you look lazy, and it makes you look like that you haven't done your homework. PR, it's a tough field. If you want to get coverage, you're going to have to work for it. And, that's pretty much the whole song and dance.
I think that's really anything good in life, right? You have to work for it.
For sure. Absolutely.
So what's something somebody can do to kind of stand out in such a crowded world of PR, the crowded world of, online media? What's something somebody can do to help them stand out?
Yeah. So you want to make sure whatever you're going to pitch matches the tone and the style of the publication you're pitching or the television show that you're pitching. Make sure that your story actually fits into whatever beat you're looking for. And the best way to find out what editors are writing about is by visiting the editorial calendar online. I can't tell you how many times, my coaching clients are like, well, how do I find out what this editor is writing about? I'm like, did you look at the editorial calendar? No, I didn't. I'm like, all right, well, let's start there. Yeah. Be able to find out what each person writes about, and then craft a narrative that is just interesting and matches the tone of the publication and also matches the specific beat of the editor or the producer that you're going to pitch. I know it sounds very abstract, but it really isn't. It takes a little practice, but once you kind of understand the way that the media world works, and once you do start embarking upon the PR or the publicity journey, you're going to learn. It's really, it's not rocket science. We're not curing cancer here. I mean, every PR person on the planet has to start from somewhere, and we all pretty much start at the same point, if that makes sense. We all start with nothing.
Yep. Absolutely. It goes along with what a lot of people say of, building a following. Everybody starts at zero. So
absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I want to dig in a little bit deeper into who Kristin is, but to find out a little bit more about you aside from the business side, but I want to find out who was most influential on who you became today.
Interesting. I think I'm a composite of a lot of different personalities, but I would say in terms of my business sense and becoming an entrepreneur, it's been my father. He was an entrepreneur. He was a huge influence on the success that I had. He taught me the fundamentals of the way that the world works. I would say kind of who I've become today on the personal side would be more of my husband. I've learned to become much more patient. I've learned how to listen much more. And I've learned how to look at things much more objectively than I ever have. We've been together since the beginning of time. So, he's been a huge influence on me for the better, because he is my better half for sure.
Well, that's very cool. I totally relate to a lot of that. My dad was an entrepreneur, and then my wife has definitely helped me become more patient. We just celebrate our 12th anniversary here last week, and so
congratulations.
Thank you. So I can definitely relate to you on that. She definitely makes me a better person, and it sounds like your husband has done the same for you. So very cool.
Yeah, for sure.
And a little bit about, before you started going out on your own, we talked about a little bit before, kind of your background. You actually decided before you got into PR, you wanted to be a lawyer. And then apparently that blew up in your face and you decided law school was not the choice for you.
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about that story of how that happened and how you decided to then go out on your own.
Yeah, it's not a very interesting story, but my first job out of college, I was a PR marketing manager for an international law firm. I thought it would be great for me to see how a law firm operates, what to do, what not to do, the type of marketing that you can do legally, because there are very strict regulations that you can do within the law.
Right.
I was there for a year. That was just not what I wanted to do. And at that point, I had taken the LSAT and I was applying to law schools, and I left that job. It was a great firm, but it wasn't the right environment for me. Mm-hmm. So then after I worked in consulting for 4 years, I was the head of PR and project management for the Northeast office. And it was great in the sense that I was able to travel and kind of see the way that the PR industry works from a global view. Mm-hmm. And then the financial crisis hit, unfortunately, and I lost my job. And luckily, during the time that I was working in consulting, I had 3 freelance clients. So I was able to bridge the gap between having, like this great cushy salary and then having nothing.
Right.
And, within 6 months, I was able to scale up to a full agency, and wow. Had 30 clients and was crazy busy and working 80, 85 hours a week. I had just gotten married. So, there was a lot of sacrifice there. And then in 2018, I just decided, it's the perfect opportunity. Let me just offload this. And, I've been kind of focusing more on the clients that I really love. I have a few passion projects and really just focusing on self-development, because in the 40 years leading up to becoming 40, I had never really had an opportunity to focus on personal development and, improving myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Personal development is a new thing for me too, over the last year and a half now. And, so it's been a fun journey to go on that, but, that's cool though, that you had that, foresight that, 2018, that was kind of the time that it was a good time to exit your agency. And there's a lot of people who just kind of jump into their passion projects and whatnot. And obviously the financial crisis wasn't something you could have predicted.
No.
But it was good that you still already had that momentum going towards that. And so I guess I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, but it's good. It seems like you're good at predicting these things without actually predicting them. So,
well, it's interesting. You can kind of get a sense of, obvious. I knew I didn't want to stay in consulting forever. I wanted to go back to school. I actually had pursued an MS in finance because at that point I wanted to work in private equity. And then, when I was working in consulting, I was looking at leaving the consulting realm and getting involved in investor relations for a private equity firm or for a hedge fund, because investor relations is very similar to public relations, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're pretty much one and the same. Not really. Well, kind of. And then it just kind of happened where I lost my job, but I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do long term, and I knew that from after being in business for a year, I wanted to sell my agency.
Okay.
And obviously it took a lot longer than I wanted, but I was able to do it and exit gracefully. And the last 2 years have, like I said, allowed me to focus on family, self-development, personal development, spend time with my husband, travel some more for pleasure, not for work. And so it's been the best decision that I've made. But like I said, you can kind of predict to a certain extent what's going to happen. Not everything,
right? But
I don't know. Maybe it's just a sixth sense. I don't know.
That'd be great if that's something you can develop, right?
Totally, it'd be amazing, right?
So the question is, you've had all these different ideas of what you wanted to do. What is kind of the future hold for you? What are you working towards now that you've had a little bit of time to do personal development and travel? What's the future holding for you?
Well, on the personal side, obviously family, children, whenever that'll happen, and professionally, I am releasing my next book on April 13th. And I have a couple of, passion projects that I've been working on. FemFounder kind of started out as just kind of this small, I guess you could say, website or blog that was designed specifically to help startups get PR and how to use it for lead generation and how to use social media to get more leads and, build awareness. And over the last, I guess, what is this? Okay. So is it 2.5 years? It's kind of turned into a self-contained source of revenue. And, it's kind of my baby. And I plan on developing that some more. I actually, believe it or not, this is funny. I have a fashion and luxury website.
Okay.
A digital magazine. Is actually called e-nixie.com. That has actually grown into this pretty good source of revenue and have a number of contributors. And so that's been fun. That's kind of been more of just like, I guess you could say more of an outlet, a creative outlet than anything. Okay. And then I have a couple other small things, but nothing, it's not, I'm never going to start another agency again. I have my consultancy, which is Marquet Media, but I'll never start another full-fledged agency ever again.
Okay. All right. Well, very, very cool that you've got all these little projects going on and that they're doing something for you. They're not just something that's passively there. It's something that's actually contributing back to you and, generating revenue. That's very important when you've got these passion projects, because sales cures all ills, it's in terms of business. So if you've got a passion project that you've been sitting on for a while and it's not generating revenue, well, then it's a little bit harder to get the motivation to work on that.
But what do they say? Progress, not perfection.
Correct.
As long as you're making progress, towards that goal, you can't really, maybe some people lose motivation, but the small incremental steps to success to actually help me stay focused.
That's good. Yeah. Everybody works a little bit differently, but it's good to know what works best for you, because then you can tune into that and really accelerate by leaning into that, where some people just don't know how they operate, and that obviously makes it more difficult to accomplish things.
Right. For sure.
So when you went out on your own, what would you say was your biggest failure and what did you learn from it?
Interesting question. And for me, it was, well, there were two prongs to this. One was scaling too quickly.
Okay.
And I know that people, it would say, oh, well, that's a good problem to have. No, it isn't, because customer service starts to fall, execution, results start to wane. And that's not good. So that was one thing. The other thing was, which actually ties into inadvertently with scaling too quickly, is working in any industry that came my way. If somebody in the legal field came to me and somebody that was a cosmetic surgeon came to me, I'd work with them.
Right.
That was disastrous. So once I decided to focus on 3 industries, I was able to streamline and optimize and be able to fill my pipeline with clients that were actually relevant to what my passions were, what my knowledge was, and also just be able to provide the value that they expected me to when they first signed up. So, and now outside friends, I have friends that refer people, colleagues that refer people, but my main 2 industries are beauty and wellness. Okay. And because that's what I get.
Yeah.
And so,
if you specialize in it, obviously you're going to be more passionate about it. You're going to understand it more, understand the nuances. You're going to be able to drive those results. So I totally understand what you're saying by, taking any work that will come your way and the results don't end up being the same. So I totally understand how that is a problem and not just a good problem to have.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Especially flipping houses, I'm sure.
Yes, that's been an interesting one because I'd like to work in specific markets, but the inventory is too low. So I do end up taking work that I'm not familiar with, and guess what? The results don't end up being the same. So
I believe it. I believe it.
Yes. So what was a challenge that you never expected to take on when you were running your own agency?
Oh, well, I mean, there were a lot, but I would say the biggest one that I learned really quickly on was how difficult people are.
Okay.
I never understood how difficult and how egotistical some entrepreneurs can be, especially the really young ones that think that they're going to, be the next Lady Gaga. Not going to happen. And I learned that you're not going to get along with everybody. When I was in high school, when I was in college, grad school, both times, I just got along with everybody. I mean, I may not have liked everybody and they may not have liked me, but, I was cordial to them. Same thing in the business world. But once I started getting, a diverse set of personalities that I was working with, it was very, very difficult to maintain expectations, to manage expectations. And, there have been more often than not, I'd have to tell clients, you're not giving me anything special. Why should Vogue or WWD cover you when they've got Louboutin, they've got Jimmy Choo. It just, so that was a really difficult thing for me to learn, was dealing with very difficult personality types.
Is that something you got better at over time, or is it still something that's hard to manage?
I think that maybe if I had, 30 or 40 clients again, I think it would probably still be an issue, but I've learned to become much more patient. And I've also learned that everybody that walks through my front door we're not going to have the right synergy. So it's okay to let them go. It's okay to turn people down. But yes, in my old age, I've gotten a little bit more, I've gotten a little bit more patient. But like I said, if I had to deal with that many personalities on a daily basis, plus a team, plus the media, I think it would get a little, I think it would get difficult for anybody, not just me,
Yeah, I think it relates between the two of, your biggest failure is taking on, people that were in the right field. That's about saying no. It really is, those difficult clients, those companies that aren't in your niche. It's important to say no rather than be a yes woman, just, yes, I'll take on that work. Yes, I'll take on that client. And yes, I'll deal with all the crap you're going to throw at me. But the importance of saying no, absolutely.
And then the flip side to that is, just really quickly, I can't tell you how many times I've had clients confide in me like I was their therapist, and they would call me, or they would text me these crazy things like, this one's having an affair, this one's doing that. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, I need to start billing you more because, now I'm your therapist. But it's interesting. Other publicist friends that I have that have agencies in other industries have said the same thing. Their clients confide in them like they are their therapist. And I think that's just a little too close for comfort. So throw down the gauntlet and say, I don't care. I don't want to know.
In some cases, the less you know, the better.
Oh, sure. Ignorance is bliss a lot of the times.
Right. So if you could start it all again, what would you end up doing differently this time around?
Good question. I would have, if I could go back, I would have worked in corporate America a little bit longer.
Okay.
Just so that I could understand the management side of business and hiring and firing and training. I did early on, I did have some issues with that, but then, I kind of learned what works and what doesn't, particularly for my group. I would have stayed in corporate a little bit longer. I don't know if I would have stayed in consulting. Maybe I would have gotten a job at an agency just to kind of see how things work. I think that's my biggest regret. And just not being so ignorant, walking into starting a business, in my late 20s, I thought I knew everything and clearly I didn't, I would just be much more well equipped to handle running a business day to day.
Right.
That's what I would do over.
I think no matter your age, you still have things to learn. So to that point, even in your late 20s, thinking you know everything, you do know a fair amount. So you might as well jump into it. So I think I tend to jump into things a little bit too early myself, but so I can relate to your feelings on that. But let's talk a little bit about your books that you've had and the books that you have, or the book you have coming out here in a couple of days after this airs. So tell me a little bit about the books that you've already written and how they relate to this new one that you've got coming out.
Yes, sure. Okay. So the first book that I had written in 2015 is called Squash the Competition, Dominate Your Marketplace. It's pretty much publicity 101 for entrepreneurs that aspiring entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs that want to learn the fundamentals of the way that the PR industry works, the way that the media works. It's pretty much just it's a short book. I think it's only maybe 15,000 words, but it's a good primer for entrepreneurs and even in-house managers to learn the PR game.
Okay.
This second book that I had written, which is called Publicity Jumpstart, I had co-written it with Michelle Lewis, who is an entrepreneur. She grew up in Hollywood, like we had talked about. And her portion was kind of more on the color of psychology and branding and how it relates to business and your personality. Whereas the back end, the later chapters were more about publicity, thought leadership, developing your online and your offline presence. It was a little bit deeper and a little bit, I guess you could call it like intermediate PR,
Okay.
if you will. The first book was beginner PR. And this third book that I have coming out on April 13th, Nameless to Notable, How to Gain Influence, Establish Your Authority, and Reach Expert Status in Your Niche or Industry. This is kind of like a very short master's degree in publicity. It teaches you everything from how to craft a pitch, what to include, how to pitch a product for television or pitch yourself for television, how to find the right contact. It's a very deep book. It goes, 30,000 feet under and explains the way that the industry works inside and out. So after you or somebody ends up reading it, they'll be able to say, okay, you know what? I'm really ready. I don't need to hire a publicist. I'm not going to waste, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month on hiring an agency when I can do this myself.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the caveat is you have to be willing to make the time. I'm not saying that you have to spend, 40 hours a week on it, but it does require, maybe an hour a day.
Yeah.
And once you do end up learning the nuances of the industry, it's going to be great because then you're going to be able to do PR, get publicity for any product you launch, any company you launch. Whether you write a book, you're trying to get, media coverage in Mashable for some type of software program. It pretty much, like I said, it's a master's degree, an abbreviated master's degree in publicity.
Awesome. And fortunately, we're recording this in enough time that I can read the other two before that one comes out, because as we talked before, it's like I definitely want to dive into that. And I love the name, Nameless to Notable. That is just awesome. It's really what people want out of their business. They feel like they're nameless. They want to be notable. You've got it right there. So I'm very excited that that's going to be out, and excited for you to have your third title out there. And I'll definitely include a link in the description as soon as it's out for in the podcast notes, so people can find it quickly and easily. But you definitely strike me as the type of person who does get out there and hustle. And I want to know, what is your personal definition of the word hustle?
So hustle to me when I was younger was kind of like drug dealer.
Okay.
Pimp, hooker.
Okay.
Because, you're hustling.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I got older and I realized that, everybody's hustling, whether it's, trying to make more money, get more leads, whatever it is, it actually has a positive connotation to it, not a negative connotation like it did when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's no harm in hustling your way to success. It means that you're trying to make moves and you're trying to pretty much be successful.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. And success could be any way you define it. It could be having more money. It could be finding the right partner. It could be having family. It could be, if you were sick and now you're not. Success can apply to any aspect of life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree. It can apply to any aspect. And I like, your version of that, and, with how it used to have a negative connotation. You've understood it now has more of a positive connotation. And some people, honestly, it still is a negative connotation, even in the modern terms. They don't want to work all the time. They just want to be able to
put in some hours and go home and relax and not have to worry about anything, really worry about their job at all. And hustle usually requires you to keep thinking about those things, even even in the off hours.
For sure. But that's what being an entrepreneur is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm excited that you took time out of your day to speak to me, because really, like I said, you've got an impressive list of accomplishments, and so I feel honored that you were able to make some time for me. So I want to be cognizant of your time, but I want to give you, before we get to the last question, I want to give you some time to give any shout outs, or where people can find you. What's the best way to find out more about you?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So, two places. One would be femfounder.co. That's the business resource that pretty much has everything on how to start, scale, and continue to scale a business, regardless of the industry. And then Marquet Media, it's marquet-media.com. That's my consultancy. And if anybody needs help, whether you're in the beauty or wellness industry, or you're an entrepreneur, really looking to scale up your media coverage and your visibility, feel free to drop me a note.
Sounds good. And I'll make sure to include those links in the description as well. But final question I want to ask you, and this is personal, business, whatever the case may be, what excites you about the future?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. I would say personally, starting a family, very exciting, always been a dream of mine. So I'm very excited to embark upon that journey. Professionally, it's really just kind of cultivating the FemFounder brand and, continuing to grow it, and just see what happens, see where it is. Maybe one day it'll be a huge hit. Maybe one day it won't. So I'm actually just really excited to see what happens with that.
Yeah, that's very cool. Like you mentioned earlier, that's kind of your baby. That's the a passion project, something you're really excited about, and those are always fun to see what it develops into, see what it becomes. And so
For sure.
Always exciting to see what happens. So I get that excitement for sure. But again, I want to thank you for your time, and thank you for coming on the Hustle the Day podcast. And I really appreciate how we've been able to connect, and I think we'll continue to connect after this. But I know I've gotten value out of this, so I know my audience has gotten value out of this as well. And I encourage all of you to take this and get out there and hustle the day.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Hustle the Day podcast all the way through. I really appreciate that. I just want to let you know that I help small businesses with their online strategy. So if you or anyone that you know needs help with their online strategy and owns a small business, I'm your guy. Go ahead and connect with me at Trent V Bray on Instagram or TrentVBray.com.